let's start with so this is just the move tool, right? So the basic move tool is what you can use to grab and move any layer. Whatever layer you're on, it will grab. It does have smart layer grabbing. So like if I grab the blue over here, it will know that I'm grabbing the blue and it will start moving it, right? So you don't necessarily have to be on a certain layer, but that can mess you up later if you don't intend to grab something. The easiest way to make sure if you're just wanting to grab one layer and just deal with that layer and move it, I always say hit Command T. So select the layer, hold Command, hit T, and then it'll make a selection box around it, and it'll give you a very clear and defined space, right? These pink lines that you see are the lineup lines, right? It's telling me that my box is center. I can do it vertically as well. It will smart do it to other things as well. It's a pretty elaborate one, but it also will depend on what you've allowed it to do. Okay, so in addition to that, if you're in here and you want to do different edits, okay, so there's different ways that you can edit the specific box, right? So I hit Command T and now I have it selected. If I select the object while I'm on it, it will move it, right? If I select it while I'm off of it, it gives me the option of rotating, right? So instead, I can decide how much I want to rotate. Shift gives us very specific, so I can do 15, 30, 45, right? So holding Shift, like many other softwares, gives you a very specific. If you let go of Shift, it gives you a more generic. If I hit Command Z, it'll return me to what I did. If I hit Escape, I can get out of the object and undo what I just did. So I'm going to do a Command T here again. When you're grabbing corners, if you're changing size, when you grab it, it will scale proportionally. That's a new thing in Photoshop. So if you have Photoshop from before, this is different. When you grab it, it scales proportionally, meaning that it keeps it within that if you go down, every amount that you shorten it, it will also thin it widthwise. If you hold Shift when you do it, right? So grab the corner and hold Shift, now it will allow you to manipulate it in different ways in different formats, okay? Again, if I hit Escape, it'll just return it to what I did. If you want to accept your alterations, hit Enter, okay? Do realize that when you accept an alteration, if I do this and I make it skinnier, I have now deleted pixels, right? I have told it, if it had, say it had 2000 pixels in that size, and I made it half the size and I saved it, it compressed all those pixels. Now it only has 1000 pixels to it, right? So it made understandings to make it look like the same image so that it condensed those, but now they're lost. They are lost. Those pixels won't come back unless I Command Z and undo it. So if I try to scale this larger now, it's not going to have the same quality. It's going to be like taking a smaller object and making it bigger. It'll distort it more. So just realize that. That's what destructive editing is. So if I want to undo that, Command Z. When I start working, I usually bring in the base file and then I'll duplicate it. So I'm just going to duplicate this layer real quick and hit Enter, and that'll give me a second layer. And then I'll turn off the original. Now I'll go into it and I'll start editing it. And I don't worry so much about messing it up, because if I mess it up, then I can delete that layer completely and just bring back the one that I just turned off the visibility on. And so normally whenever I go onto a tangent, if I have an idea and I'm like, oh, this would be cool, and I try it, and if it doesn't work, I have that backup still there. But if it does work, then awesome, I just keep going with that. But it's never a bad idea to keep some of the originals, so that if you mess up, even if you're just deleting, like if you're editing or something in some way, you always want to make sure you have the foundation. And you can even just make that a folder of all your original images, or however you want to, your workflow is best. Okay. In addition to that, we also have other transforms. So in here, these are kind of more entertaining ones. Scale will edit the size of it as if you're warping the scale. So if I grab the corner of it, I can just, oh wait, scale size, sorry. I'm trying to do so scale is just doing the normal making it larger or smaller, right? Holding Shift makes it one way or the other. Rotate, so again, you don't have to click these first two because they automatically happen with it. The other ones that are more entertaining, Skew, is where you can grab a corner and kind of adjust that corner, right? So if I pull that down, it will proportion everything else in relation to it. I'm going to hit Escape so that it undoes that edit. So Skew is a fun one. Distort is kind of the same, except Distort works slightly differently. All right, so if I grab the corner on it, it works similarly, but if I grab the edge on it, it will only go, okay. So it's not so much reshaping the thing as it is just kind of tweaking it in one way or the other. If I do perspective, that's kind of similar edits, but it keeps it within the confines. This is what I thought I was doing earlier when I said scale. It keeps it within the confines of perspective. So if I grab this and I pull it together, it'll make it look perspective. If I grab it and pull it back out, I can make it look like it's a much wider perspective, right? If I just grab the top, I'm going to undo that. If I just grab the top, it will only make it go left or right. It'll change that perspective either way. If I want to make it shorter or taller, then I have to grab the side or grab the corner, and it'll do both. So this is useful because say I have this board here and I don't want it to be that angled. I want it to be it's going to go on a head-on wall. So I will come in and I will do perspective, and I will make this larger, and I will make this a little smaller. And my goal is to make it look as much like a flat chalkboard as I can, or as a dry erase board as I can. So perspective does them equally. If I were to do distort, I could grab each corner and individually move them so I can get it as precise as I want to. It's not always great, but it does help depending on what you're trying to do. Okay? Does all of that make sense? The last one in here is warp that we're going to talk about specifically for actually changing the shape. And this just adds more dimensions to it. So you can see I have more points, and that means I can actually grab those points and move them. I can grab and distort the object from different spots on it and manipulate it that way. And then I can use these little knobs as a way to adjust those fine-tuned movements. So if I want to distort in this way, and I can reshape it, you can even like fold it over on itself, right? So that it's kind of going on top, and it does some really bizarre things. So that's a fun tool to mess around with as you're trying to reshape things and reorient what you're working with. Be wary of overworking stuff. If you overwork it, again, the pixels will they do the math that they have to make it work, but it's not perfect. And every time you make an edit to one thing, you're diminishing the knowledge it has of the existing pixels, right? Of the current pixels that will be your highest quality image. The others down here, rotate 180, rotate clockwise, that's just turning it specific amounts, and flip horizontal and flip vertical just turns the whole thing one way or another. So horizontal here, vertical this way. So if I did horizontal, it would just flip it over on the y-axis, and the other one is on the x-axis, okay? I'm going to Control Z that, or Command Z that again to get that undone. Okay, so that's editing. All right, so when we're over here, we're in the Marquee tool. So the Marquee is your selection tool. So if I'm grabbing, I can make specific boxes of the shape. So if I hit delete, it'll delete that, right? We remember from before that I added these effects to it, the drop shadow and the like. If you change the surface, it will apply those to the exterior or the interior, wherever you are, right? It'll make sense with it. If I take pen and okay, so this is the marker pen tool. If I hold Alt, it gives me an eyedropper. I can select the color I want. And now I'm going to make this a little bit smaller just to show that if I take and I kind of come in here and draw, it will literally fill in the gaps, but it stops on the edges to show where it is. It treats that entire layer as one surface. The other thing that you can do, say you don't want it to look like specifically that, if I add another layer and I come in here and I start drawing on it, this is a different layer, so it won't have that effect. But if I put a folder up and I put them in it and I say, I put both of them in that folder, and then I right click on the folder and I add blending options to that, you can add blending options on top of, instead of just to images or layers, you can add them to entire folders. So I could do a pattern overlay to the entire thing. I could do an outer glow to the entire thing. That's really big. So the spread is making it look really non-centralized. And again, a lot of these things you're just tweaking until you can find a way to make it look as clean or crisp or whatever you're trying to make it do. But it does add that outer glow to here. If I add a stroke to it, it'll give me that solid black line. Again, that's 12. So if I bring the stroke down to 1, it'll be much less. It's still taken, because it's on the whole folder, it's adding an outline to the entire folder, and it's gigantic. But yeah, you can edit. If I do an inner glow, it can add an inner glow to the entire thing. But again, bevel and bows gives you a little bit of dimension. It rounds your corners over and it adds a little highlight and a little shadow. If I increase the depth of it, it gives me more highlight and more shadow, so it feels deeper. If I take it down, it makes it feel like there's less of an edge to it. Stroke is that outline that goes around that looks obscure in that. In a normal, if I were to just do a stroke to this image, to just the squiggles, it just gives me a line that matches the outside of that, right? So that's a 12-point stroke. So a stroke is an outer edge, and each pixel is how thick. So 1 pixel thickness, 2 pixel thickness, 3 pixel thickness, all the way around, right? And we're thinking in pixels a lot, so kind of get used to thinking in those terms. If I add just an inner shadow to this, it's so big that it's just making the whole thing gray. But if I drop it down in size, I'm using the arrow keys to up and down here. And if you hold shift when you do an arrow key, it makes things jump 10 points at a time. You can also grab different, you know, grab these, or you can just grab the actual name and I can move this way. So if you're here, this works similarly out here. So if I want to change the opacity, I can just grab the opacity and slide it back and forth. As long as I'm holding, I can move one way or the other and it decides what opacity you're setting it at, right? If I hold this, it gives me the other options. This is the elliptical marquee tool, so it just does circular shapes. If I hold it down, if I hold shift while I do it, it'll give me a perfect circle, right? If I hold shift while I'm, or okay, so I've made a circle. Now I hold shift, it gives me that little plus sign. Now I can do a second circle and I have the same freedom. If I hit shift again, it'll give me a very straight line. If I overlap them, they just link together and it assumes selection is selection, okay? If I hold Alt gives you the inverse usually. So now I can make an opposite circle and now my selection is only those two things, right? So I've made a moon and two moons instead of anything else. Don't you hate when you see a drawing of the moon and it has like, you can, if it's like a crescent moon and you can see the sky behind it, like where the crescent cutout is? How does that, sorry, that's bad Photoshop work, right? You can't see the sky through the moon. Anyway, all right. I digress. It happens. Single row marquee tool. So this is great if you're just doing, if you want to select just one marquee, one line, right? So it's one pixel, the entire length of whatever you're working on. So if I want to just delete 1 pixel worth here, I can just delete 1 pixel worth. Or if I want to, if I hit command or hold option and hit delete, it'll fill it in with that color, right? Or if I hit command, it'll fill it in with my alternate color. So control and holding control and hitting delete fills in any selection with that color. Hitting command and delete does it with the alternate. And if I'm ever saying command, I say command because I'm on a Mac. If you're on a PC, command is control. And on a PC, alt is, or alt option on a Mac. Alt on a PC, that's correct, right? PCs, I'm sorry. So if you have them, I can find you a connecting tutorial. Okay, that's the horizontal one. This is the vertical one. So this is just a single marquee tool for vertical. It's the exact same thing, but it gives you only one specific size. When you're making selections, you do get some variables up here. Feathering is a selection that takes your pixels and alters the edge on them. So if I'm just doing a box, say I want to give every selection I make 10 pixels worth of feathering. Now when I do it, it'll give me that feathered edge. So if I hit command enter or command delete, it fills in that color and that's 10 pixels worth of feathering on the edge. The other way to do that, I don't like changing these up here because it makes it super permanent and I rarely will make every selection have a feather. If you're like doing something and all you're doing is feathering your selection, power to you, go with that. But for me, command D to get rid of it, what I would do is make that selection and then come up here to the select tab, the drop down menu for selection, and then I would come into modify. I don't know if you can see this the way it's working, but you can select feather in here. And so when you select feather in here, then you can alter your selection. So if I wanted to have 10 pixels of feather or 20 pixels of feather, I can apply that later. And then my selection now will have it whenever I shift delete, it'll give me that. Or if I'm drawing, if I take my pen tool and I'm just drawing inside here, it will still give me that feather. I'm going to shift my color so it's not white on white, but it'll give me that variation so that when I unselect it, it has that kind of feel to it. So you can create really weird effects or varying things. And the idea is that you just kind of know enough tools that if you're trying to do something, like you're like, I need to make this look like it's fading out. We have 4 or 5 ways we can figure out how to make it look that way. And none of them are right or wrong. And this is like any other software. There's 5,000 tools on here. If you learn 20 of them, you'll be able to function. If you learn 100 of them, you'll function so much faster, but you're no better than anyone else, right? Cool. So that's selections, all right? Just going over those. This is the lasso tool like we talked about last time. So the regular lasso, you have to hold down and then wherever you move your mouse, it'll make a selection. Again, if I hold command while I'm making that selection, or sorry, if I hold shift while making, after I let go, it'll give me the choice to do another one. Similar rules apply. If I hit alt while I do it, it'll give me not one. So it'll unselect anything I did. So that's kind of fun. The polygonal one is the same thing, except for it does straight lines. So every time you click, if you double click, it will finish whatever you're doing. It'll just finish it up. So it'll find its first point and it'll make that a solid object. So it may not be what you intended. If I'm trying to do this, and I double click, it'll finish it by just slashing it right through. And now it's gonna, when I do that, it's gonna give me some really weird nonsense, right? Because, and I guess I can just show this layer on top. If I move this layer on top of the dry erase board, now the dry erase board's behind my blue layer, and you can see only my blue layer because of what I've done to it, okay? So yeah, you can get some cool stuff out of it if you do that kind of stuff. But again, if you're not intending to, it may not be what you want. The magnetic lasso tool understands pixels. And so it will work in a way that it will find the edges of things before it finalizes the line. So you can kind of vary it. And it depending on how closely you follow the item that you're trying to follow, but it can do this with other things too. Like if you're trying to cut a duck out. Again, I don't really like this tool because it never gives me exactly what I want it to be. It does, try it, see how it feels. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. I'm normally a fan. If I'm trying to select something, I'm more into just doing a deletion of everything else around it. We talked about the magic wand tool and the quick selection tool. This is the crop tool. So this is if you're trying to change the actual size of the canvas you're working. Rarely will we use this because we don't, once we set the size of our canvas, everything you save, if I save this right here, and that's exactly where I want it on the brick wall, but it's a different layer than the brick wall, and I save the brick wall in here by itself, when I transfer it to the other, to After Effects, it will line up exactly as it's lined up here because everything will fit exactly into the frame that I made on After Effects. So rarely will we want to mess with the actual crop of it. Frame tool. I've never used the frame tool. It looks like a, oh, look at that. That's clever. So again, like, because there's not eyedropper tool normally comes up if you're using it, but if you just need to get an eye, you know, if you just wanted to select the color and use that, you can do it that way. If you hit Alt and you're in an actual tool, it'll give you that same thing. Let's play with some filters. Let's look at this brick room. I'm going to bring this layer up to the top. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, did I make this a group there? What, where'd it go? Wait, where'd I put it? Oh, I made its own. I got it. Yep. Great. Wonderful. Okay, so first thing we note is that it's got this smart filter on, which means that if I want to change the size, now's the time to do it. Now's the time it's going to remember math and do its best mathematically to keep, whenever I expand or shrink something, the best it can to its right size. But I can't make edits to it until I get rid of that smart principle. So I'm gonna get rid of the smart principle by rasterizing the layer. Okay, and then what we're going to be, I'm going to hit Command T so I can change the size a little bit. I just want to make it a little bit bigger so I can see it more on my frame. I can see all my edges and make sure I'm not dealing or not losing anything in the background. I'm going to turn that off. So I just got this, and then I'm actually going to resize this. So I'm going to hold Shift as I resize, and it will automatically help me size it to the edge of the screen. Okay. So now, say this is nice, but it's not exactly the red brick that I wanted. I can come up, and I'm going to just see if I can switch this around so you can see when I do drop down menus. So I come up to, at the top, I go up to image. Okay. And can you guys see mode and adjustment and all that? Yes, cool. Okay, so I'm in image. I don't think you can see that. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to adjustments, and these are all your photo adjustments. Now remember, these will destroy pixels. So whatever you change, if you accept it, it will change your image in that way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to turn it off so that I don't lose any of the progress I made. I spent the time to resize it to the size of the room I wanted. I'm going to save that and keep that progress right here. Now I'm going to work on the copy and edit it however I want. So I'm going to hit edit, or I'm sorry, I'm going to go image, adjustments, brightness and contrast is our first one. Okay. This is phenomenal. This resource is amazing. Okay. Brightness is your brightness. Generally, I won't start with my brightness. Generally, I'll start with contrast. Contrast is paramount in designing projections. And the reason being, if you're projecting up on a wall and you're projecting a thing that's black and white, you're not projecting black. There is no black project because there's no black light. Black light is a different thing. That's when you think of black light, that is a horse of a different color. There is no color black to project. It is the absence of color. Gray is just white turned down to 20% or 30% or 40%. Okay. So when you have contrast, that really helps define what the audience is seeing. So amping up the contrast basically takes and separates further away from each other so that the darks get darker and the lights get lighter, and it brings it to a range that makes it look more distinct. Okay, so these lines will become super apparent in the projection because the white is so different than the black. If you get rid of the contrast, this is going to be really hard to distinguish on the wall because the colors are so muted and close together, you don't get the crispness of detail. If you're creating something and you're just making a video output, get it to look like the way you want it to. If you're doing it on stage, you oftentimes will just over contrast things because it's the only way to get a clear, because oftentimes you're not trying to see the whole image, you're trying to see only the negative space or only the positive space. And so when you do that, when you make it that crisp, your brain fills in the rest of the details for the audience the way you want it to, and you can see it. If you don't make it that crisp, maybe half the audience can't even see the image. Okay, so for me, I'm just going to amp it up. We'll just go about there. I think that's nice. Brightness plays with that same qualities, and brightness over. We're gonna look at a different one in a second, which is not brightness. It's I can't remember what it is offhand, but brightness is the one you want to use because brightness is smarter. It adapts better with what you have. Okay, so let's just go. We'll go there. I don't know. That looks wonderful. It depends on what I'm doing if I'm setting it. Levels, I don't really use. Curves, I don't really use. Exposure, I don't really use. Vibrance is okay, but not as good as Hue and Saturation. Hue and Saturation gives you your stronger changes, okay? So saturation is how colorful it is. If I turn this, okay, too much. So we can play with how much color there is. So if you want something that's really saturate, you can amp that up. But like I said, maybe the brick isn't supposed to be that terrible of an orange. We want it darker. That's where we come into hue. And I can grab and move the dial around, or I can move it down, 10 at a time, 15 at a time. Maybe I wanted the brick to be green, right? So maybe I'll take it all the way over to green. So it depends because it changes everything in the image. It may make it, you may be like, oh, I really want the trees to be green and they're purple. But if you change that, it may change the grass to a completely different green that looks terrible. So you have to be weary of what you do with this. But if you ever see, if you want to be like, so this is a nice, I like that. That's a good, no, let's go a little bit here, even a little lower. Again, lightness is the other one. We don't want to use lightness. Lightness, it just kind of ruins the image as opposed to preserving the important qualities that brightness does. I don't know why brightness over lightness, but lightness, I rarely will change lightness. Okay, I'm gonna turn the saturation down a little bit. It's getting a little purple. I'm gonna make it back a little bit. Now I'm gonna go back to the contrast and I'm gonna look at what it does with my new colors. So image adjustment, brightness and contrast. Oh, we had a little more crispness there, right? That's nice. That's got a nice crispness to it. It's not a super realistic wall. If I want to take it down a bit, I could. I think I'm gonna keep it right where it was. Okay. Does that make sense with those things? If something is white, it cannot have its hue changed. If something is black, it cannot have its hue changed. If I go in here and I do vibrance, vibrance has that saturation, but it also has vibrance. And vibrance is kind of playing with the hue of it. It's not so much the saturation, but it's like a quality of it. Where saturation is how much color, vibrance is like the quality of the color that you're getting out of it. It's like playing with the fine tuning on each one. So you can play with the vibrance as well. Normally I will dive into vibrance and saturation if I'm doing landscapes or I'm doing outdoor scenes and it's supposed to look grand and majestic on stage. I'll really push the colors further because you really want the audience to feel whatever that grand gesture is. Things you can do also. I can come in here and I can make a selection, right? So maybe I'll do my polygonal tool and I'm gonna make myself a fun shape of selection here. Oh, this is gonna be art. It's like a star, but like a 5-year-old drew it. Okay, so now that I have that selection, I can still come in here and make some changes, right? So I can play with hue and saturation. I can desaturate just part of it, right? I can get rid of the saturation completely from that area. I can come back and I can go in here and I can go into the contrast and I can amp that contrast up and I can bring the brightness down. And now I've got this weird, like, I hit Command Z and I unseparate it. And now I have this like star feature and it's just desaturated or it's color changed. Same thing applies. I can pick a thing. I can select just the trees in an image and then alter their saturation. Just realize this crisp line will exist, right? So if I don't want that crisp line to happen, before I start making my changes, I go into selection. Select is the thing at the top, the drop down, and then I'm going to modify. Feathering is fine, smoothing rounds it over. So if I do like 3 pixels of smoothing, it changes it a little bit. It smooths out the corners a little bit and softens it. And then I'll do select and I'll make it I'll add some feather to my selection. So let's do 20 pixels of feather. Now, if I go in and I desaturate it, pull down that, right? Now, oh, amp up the contrast. 1 second, I'm in the wrong one. I want to do hue and saturation first. So if I pull the saturation down here, now when we look at it, and I will do some contrast too, because I like how it looks with more contrast. That gray is boring. Pushing the contrast separates my black and white further so that I can go darker with it and still get a relative distinction between the two colors. But now if I hit Command Z, notice the soft transition between the two because it feathers between my selections. So now it's just a space that's missing color as opposed to it being a very crisp, clean, this is a 5-year-old star, okay? Other things in the image, because I have nothing selected, I'm gonna just go through some more. Color balance, you can just pull specific colors in or out. So this is playing with your cyan, magenta, yellow, or your red, blue, green. As you go more red, it takes out cyan. If you go more green, it'll take out your magenta. So it's just two ends of the spectrum. You can make your image more blue or yellow. These are useful sometimes, like if you're trying to theme something and you don't want any blue in the image, you can try to pull, like if I don't want blue in this image, I'll take it towards yellow and I'll take it towards green and I'll take it towards red because each one will slightly pull a bit of yellow out of it. This one you could probably leave here and still get away with it. It will take, right? But down here are more options. So if I want to take, I just want the whole shadows to be blue, I could just make those blue and then bring the other colors out of it completely. That's terrible. Don't do these things. Use them within reason, right? The highlights are a different thing. So I want the highlights to be super green. So it only selects the highlights and edits them. Look at that. That's like art. Image, let's see what's else in here. Black and white. If you want to black and white your image, it just does it for you. You can do variations of it. So you can pick how much of each one it turns to what color. You can pretend there's a blue filter on it. And sometimes I'll just flip through these. The names are less relevant, but it's basically adding, it takes each color in it and it makes that the color that's most black or most white. And so each one of these has a really different look to it. And I generally will just flip through these if I'm trying to get something, or my go-to is to set it to default and then to go in and mess with contrast and brightness and contrast because it does relatively the same things, okay? Adjustments, further adjustments, photo filters. If you want sepia tone things, this is the place that I go. These are less colored. They're not so overwhelming, but it kind of does add a hint of a color to whatever you're doing. It kind of applies it to the whole thing. If you're doing, if you want something that's sepia colored, I generally go down to this one and then just amp this up, and it'll just, or basically start with black and white. So I like this. I'm going to keep it. So I'm going to duplicate it, edit. Maybe I want this image to be black and white. So I'll do black and white. I'll hit enter. I just go with the normal. And then I'm going to come into brightness and contrast, amp up the contrast, bring down the brightness. Nope. That's good. Now, if I go in and I do adjustments, and I add a photo filter, now I can make it look like a sepia picture, right? Because I've already pulled the color out of it. Or maybe if I didn't want it to be that decolored, because that's really not what a sepia picture looks like. It's just, it's hints of the color. I can come in here and just pull the saturation back way bit, right? So now I just get these very light colors in here. And then I go in and I add my photo filter, and now it's gonna make it a sepia feeling. Right, it gives it a little more of a sepia feeling because it is because it still has some of that color in it. So you can vary it, and sometimes you're lying to your audience, but it's okay because whatever works for the scene. A concept only goes as far as it works for the show that you're working on. Okay. Let's see what other ones in here. Invert's great. Let me do these real quick. Channel mixer, I don't use. Color lookup, I don't use. Invert is great because it flips the colors. So if you need something inverted, it's a good way to go. Or you can do something where, again, just do like a selection and then just invert that. Adjustments, invert, right? If you want something to look alien or different, it just does the exact opposite of what it was supposed to be. These are all additional things, desaturate matte. Most of these are just elaborate tools that do the same things that we've done before. So posterize, you can do a variation on. This is kind of like adding two effects to it. Let's get a more interesting. Actually, no, we'll keep up with this one. We'll keep with this one though. Delete, don't need. Okay, so looking at this, I'm going to jump over to filters, and this is another thing that you can do. And now that you're going to be introduced to filters, you're going to start seeing filters everywhere. So if you watch anything where people are trying to make something look mosaic or something, you're just, and this is something my husband and I do quite frequently, where we're just like Photoshop filter, and if you can name it, that's like even better. But when we go in here, we saw in that video the neural filters, that's if we're affecting faces and things like that. But the filter gallery is where we can apply different textures and things, right? So starting with texture at the bottom, the texturizer just makes it look like it's kind of printed on a canvas, right? So if I want it to look like stained glass, this is a way, and each of these has different, so I can amp up the relief, I can amp up the scaling, I can turn down the scaling, I can change it from burlap to canvas, which has a different feel to it. I can make it brick. So if I want it to feel like brick, and again, when I take the scaling down, it makes the depth of the brick thinner. If I make it bigger, it's bigger. The relief is how much inset there is. I can invert the brick. So if we have this, here, and then I invert it, it just kind of changes which things it's affecting. So that's the texturizer. Sandstone's another option. And this is just, again, if you want to add it, it looks like this has kind of been spray painted on sandstone as opposed to being just whatever natural thing it is. I will say, I do like to, if I'm doing a show and it's like a weird, like the shows I did where I always had the projection behind, so it was like the boards framing it, I would oftentimes go through and just apply one filter or a series, like 3 or 4 steps of different filters to every single image. And what that does is no matter where I pulled the images from or what I did to them, now they all look like they fit into the same world. They all speak the same language, right? By adding filters to things, you can universalize things that looked completely different. You can hide blemishes or mistakes. And I'm not talking on people, I'm talking on your work. Um, so this is the stained glass filter. So you can change the border thickness if you want it to be smaller. If you saw that picture of Pippin with the stained glass, this is where I started. I made one layer out of the frame, and then the frame itself I took out and then used the rest of it to manipulate underneath. But the colors that it's using here are the colors that are in my selection. I'm going to go back and show you. Okay, so these two colors, when you're in filters, they become very important. So if I'm going to hit X to switch those, and I'm just going to pick let's do any IU colors. Woo! Campus Pride, things like that. Great. So now if I go into filters and look, the colors that are going to be affected to things are going to be based on the colors I've selected, right? So that yellow is now the stained glass gradient. And if I switch it, the colors in outside, it'll switch it to whatever the other color is. So border thickness, light intensity, how much light is coming through the window, right? It even gives you like a little hot spot of sunlight so you can make it look like stained glass. Patchwork, so this is giving it a different setup. This is kind of like pixelating it a little bit. So if you're looking to do something with pixels, just take the relief and turn it down real low, and now you have a pixelated image, right? And you can decide how many pixels you want per size. Mosaic tiles, oh, the mosaic feature. Right, lightning grout, changing the tile size so we can see, but this creates a feeling that it was created from multiple different layers. These are the things that the engineers made and they came up with, and then we get to use in different ways. Grain is a good way to kind of break up an image. So if you're trying to not look at, maybe not that much, but if you're trying to just add a little interest, ready, see here, and then with no grain, there's like no interest there, but now I'm like, oh, look at that, that's mildly interesting, right? It adds a little interest. The contrast, again, how much you can turn it up or turn it down. You can play with that. You can play with the type of grain. So if you want it to be sprinkled, and again, that blue is coming from the blue I selected earlier. So whatever your colors are that you have picked, it will work with those colors when when it needs to make a choice about color, it will give you that color. Okay. Stylize, this one's just weird. You can play with this if you want. There's just one in here, but I rarely use this if you're trying to do something that this fits into. Power to you. Sketch makes it look like a drawing. So if I want it to look like watercolor, I can change the fibers on the watercolor paper. I can change the brightness of it, the contrast, yada, yada, yada. Torn edges, again, is just one of those. It depends on the image of what it's going to do, but it kind of just alters the way that it thinks of the space with these colors in mind, right? So all of these are colors in mind. So I can make an image black and white by just making black and white my two colors. Or if you really want this background to be any IU, You know, you make your two colors, whatever they are, and then you can pick your filter. And you can play with these. Again, I'm going to let you all play with them as you go, because that's what I do. When I'm working, I just, you know, kind of futz around until I find something that I like. And that's how I pick stuff. I'll click through all these. Charcoal. All of the sketch ones are based, besides water paper, are based on the colors you pick. When you get up to these ones, it uses your natural color. So this is a diffused glow, where you can add graininess or glow, and it'll add in that diffused glow as your new color. Your distortion for glass, to make it feel like you're looking through glass. Ocean ripple, okay? These are brush strokes, so these are just meant to make it feel like you're using different types of brushes. So this is an angled stroke, crosshatch. Again, each one has more things that you can play with. Dark strokes, ink outline, so it picks specific colors and it gives it kind of an outer. It's like a stroke almost, but it gives it like an ink outline. Sprayed strokes. Yep. Again, changing some of the details on it really can alter what you see in the actual image, depending on what things that you change in these. And sometimes they have different drop downs. So if they have drop downs, you know, if we got this and we're looking at this really long line, I can change the direction. Now it's horizontal. Now it's left diagonal. Now it's vertical, right? So the same things give you different options. Cool. Artistic are the last ones. These are kind of just giving, these are the ones I go to the most, because they kind of have the most distinct thing. If you want something to look like a cartoon cutout, this is a fantastic way, because it simplifies your edge, right? And it just basically picks how many colors. So if I want this to be two colors, it'll only, because other than the base color, it uses two different colors to make this. If I give it three colors, it just adds a little more dimension. So it lets in more pixels to what it's going to allow to be determined before it breaks it up into different sizes, right? And the fidelity of the edge will alter that, how clean or not clean that looks. Dry brush, film grain, a lot of highlight there. Film grains, again, are great. This is kind of the same thing, but this is more a gray version of a grain than having the multicolored one that the other one was. Paint daubs, palette knife. A lot of these I either use because they're super specific to something, or it's really bizarre and that's just the way it goes, or I'll never use them. Like, I've never used plastic wrap. I don't know why you'd want something to look like it's wrapped in plastic. No, I did use it for last year for CTW. I used it on the water bottles. I was trying to make the water bottles look like they were in a plastic container, so I use plastic wrap. Smudge stick, sponge, and you can go through these and play with these, but it's a good way to universalize things. You can also do layers on layers. So if I do splayed strokes and then I come in and then I do filter gallery, if I click that top one, it'll just redo what I did. So if I click a different image, it'll just add the same layer to that. So there's another effect and there's another effect, and this is just what it does if you keep adding that effect to it. Cool. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and it's all kind of just play with it and see, and you can get a better idea, but you don't need any of it. But if you run into a thing where you're like, oh, I want to do this, how do I do that? I'll say, oh, let's try this tool, or I'll point to you online. Like, honestly, Photoshop and After Effects, I learned myself. And the only way that I learned it was watching tutorials on YouTube and then coming back and going, oh, I need to do this thing. I'm going to Google that and find somebody who's done it. And then I found it that way. You got to be resourceful in the real world. Like, you got to be able, I can teach you as much as I can teach you, but if you can find the information and move yourself forward, then you've just become reliable in so many more ways besides doing projections work, right? So if you want to know how to do something, it's out there.